I think we need to basically commend him for a great speech. What we're going to do now is to basically get our panelists to comment on that speech and some of the ideas that have been generated by it. And, you know, I think what Mark's laid out there is very much a question to us all. The first is, you know, President Kenyatta's point, Kenya stands on the cusp of greatness. Prosperity is something that is within our reach. What needs to happen to make that happen? That's the first question I think you're asking us, Mark. And the second thing is, what role should the UK's development program play in trying to help that happen? Okay? So what I think we're going to do is first hand over to the panelists here, and then I'm going to open it to the floor for Q&A. Okay. So I think I'm first going to ask Vimal Shah to comment. Vimal, many of us know him. He's a hugely successful business person. And Vimal, of course, it comes from Kenya, was born in Nyeri. I won't say when, Vimal, so you have to thank me for that later. He went to school here.
Before Google.
He is, as we all know, the founder and CEO of Bidco, the Bidco Group, and it's the largest manufacturer of edible oils in East Africa and now beyond, which I'm glad to see. He's one of our pioneers in terms of entrepreneurs really expanding his business throughout East Africa, particularly now I think in Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, and of course Kenya. Bidco, as you know, manufactures a range of different products from edible oils to detergents and has a very sizable market share in those markets. Vimal, I think, is one of those entrepreneurs that's a real inspiration to many of us. I know you also have a very wide mentorship program for folks around the region. And he's been awarded, obviously, the East African Entrepreneur of the Year Award from the All African Business Leaders Awards, and also been obviously received the Order of the Burning Spear from the government of Kenya. So Vimal, with that introduction, I'd like to hand over to you.
Good evening, everyone. I will also say all protocols observed. I think the challenge here that you set up for us is very clear. What should developmental aid be doing? And I think first and foremost, we should be doing something we call design thinking. And design thinking means let's look at it from bottom up rather than top down. And why am I saying this? Because a lot of times we've had a lot of developmental aid coming to us prescription made, prescribed by somebody to say, this is what you need, and this is from the Western eyes, and this is what you should be doing. And I think we need to look at solutions that are locally oriented. We've got to preserve our value system. We've got to preserve our family value system and all that when you put it together. And so within that context, what is it that we really need? Because I know this example that for aid that happened even in the slum area redevelopment. It happened in India, where they actually went and said, let's remove the slums, and they gave people good houses to live in. They also built one room on the side and said, this is a room which you can rent out, and on the side you stay and you get some income out of it. As soon as this was built, they lost their land where they were staying as slums, and they got into these buildings. And the next thing they did is rented out both properties, and they went out to another slum and says, I'm used to my slum area. I want this to be rented out, so they got income from it. I just want that to be clear. But having said that, I think the good side of it all, what we talk about, I can proudly say, although we're in East Africa altogether, I can proudly say that this is a new Kenya today. We are the fastest reforming country across in Africa. And I think we've reformed everything. Last Friday, we reformed our entire business act, with the Business Act coming in, Insolvency Act, all that to become 21st century thinking. So we've done a lot of that. The infrastructure in the last 10 years, the soft infrastructure, has been developed a lot. The demand side of the equation, we're adding 800,000, probably 1 million per annum to our job market every year. So that, we have a clear demand side issue. We also have a supply of manpower, and we need to make sure we create that many jobs. That's one of the areas. On the consumption side, that is a good story because we now have, in year 2010, we had 40 million people. Now we have 44 million people. Every year add 1 million. By 2030, we shall be around 60, 65 million people, depending on how fertile we are. But that's a good story for supply, for demand side. There's going to be demand. There's going to be people who need food, clothing, shelter, and all that. But on the supply side, the question remains, are we going to be serving this supply from locally produced stuff, locally grown or whatever, or is it going to be from outside? Is it going to be from India, which is China, India, Indonesia, whatever? Or is it going to be from the West? We have an opportunity here. So that's a serious opportunity here. And I think what TMEA has done, I think we need to really appreciate that what they've done. It's a fantastic model of how all developmental aid people can come together in a concerted effort, pointed way, rather than a blunted effort in the past. And I say this in the past tense. In the past, it was every government coming and saying, I've got my own ego, I've got this, I'm from X country, Y country, this country. And each one had a program with the country. And the government guys would say, okay, we've got this from Germans, we've got this from the British, we've got this from these guys. And right now with TMEA, you've come together. So that's a fantastic model. And I think we just need to ramp that up and make it better. Faster cycle times through the port, goods going through. I think it's a given. You spoke about it. It's happening. From 21 days, we're down to 3-4 days now. We in the private sector have signed up to say, let's make it hours. Let's make it 8 hours of dwell time in the port. So the port is not used as a storage area. It's used for coming through and really making it happen. Now, obstructions to flow, and that's what are important now, because then we've sorted out a few things there. The rest is obstructions to flow. Obstructions to flow are people at the end of the day. It's the human capital that's there. And I think what you talked about in terms of developing the human capital, I think a huge area of improvement there would be changing mindsets. Changing a lot of mindsets of command control systems. You talk about the port authorities, you talk about the KRA there, you talk about the policeman who's obstructing the flow. I think we need to change those mindsets. We really have to work together. Again, this is going to be an inside out. We've got to work together with private sector, with NGOs, with civil society and say, fine, how do we change this? We have access to markets. That's another area now. When we talk about access to markets, we've got Kenya is 144 million, but we've got the East Africa. We've got Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi. 5 countries, which is 150 million people today. By 2030, that shall be 260 million people. So when you look at the demand side of the whole thing, there is fantastic opportunities here, which means we will need bigger roads, bigger railways, all that stuff. A lot of that is happening. But I think overall, we need to make sure we create jobs in Eastern Africa. And therefore, I would talk about value addition, which is a favorite subject of mine. Value addition to a lot more produce out here. We need to empower people to do much more. I just saw one person recently. It's called Bishop Titus Masika near Machakos, Kitue, I think. He's got this huge agribusiness plan that he's done for the people. He actually went and said they were dependent on aid, and he says, let's remove aid. And they actually removed aid from that area. They've empowered the people by putting water banking, water harvesting, and really they said agriculture should not be rain dependent. That's a huge opportunity. People are waiting for the rain and saying act of God. When God gives us rain, we shall be doing it. He says, if you have water, that's what you will need for agriculture. And they're getting 2-3 seasons out of it. So a lot of that, really, the agribusiness side of it, we produce for ourselves. And therefore, we've got 47 counties. And I can tell you one thing, each county, devolution is fantastic, we love it. It is bringing focus to all those counties. We just need to make sure that they're empowered to do what they can do to become self-sufficient in a lot of these things. So food security in terms of becoming self-sufficient. Another thing that's important, and I think a lot of us only realized it once President Obama came here and we had a global entrepreneurship summit. The amount of entrepreneurship spirit that's here in Kenya is just amazing. Across East Africa too, it's not only Kenya, but I think more so in Kenya and Uganda and Rwanda. If you see everybody on the roadside, they can set up shop within half a day or probably in hours. They sell all their stuff. At night, the shop is packed up. And next day, they're on it again. And they actually have what the customer wants. They know customers' needs. Customers need cold water, they need some fruits, they need this or that, and they're customer friendly. Again, they're also giving credit there on the roadside. They know the customer who's coming in every day. They say, okay, fine, I'll give it to you to pay me tomorrow, pay me day after. There's a lot of entrepreneurship spirit. What we need is to give them oxygen. Give them oxygen. Right now, the council guys will come and remove them and say, fine, you're gone. We need to give them markets. We need to give them a market where they can actually operate. That's what we need to do in counties, in cities. There was a plan for this, but it hasn't been implemented. That's one thing we need to ramp up. I think apart from that, a huge amount of master planning for the new population that's coming in. 21st century thinking is required here from the local people ourselves. Because today, I can tell you, our kids, our youngsters are amazingly entrepreneurial. They have internet, they're powered with internet. If you launch a new phone in London today, it's required here next day because they aspire to it. Are our supply chains as good? Are we supplying the same stuff here immediately? If I talk about Apple iPhone 6 launched in New York, next day they want it here. Apple says we launch in 6 months' time in Kenya. By that time, there's a few guys who are entrepreneurs who are already getting it in their bags. It's already here. So I'm just saying there's a lot more entrepreneurship spirit here. We need to empower Kenyans in that manner. Again, not only Kenyans, but I think East Africans. Wastage, and I would say this very importantly. We do Kaizen. I think Frank and TMEA know about this. The amount of wastage we have in aid, in developmental aid, we need to stop that. We need to reduce that. We need to make it far more productive. So look at productivity of that aid. Is it getting us more value for money? The quality of it, is it far better quality? Reduce the cost of that. And at the end, delivery. Delivery must be on time, in full, error-free. That's important for everything that we do going forward. So I think TMEA is doing a fantastic job. But overall, Kenya can be, and I think we discussed this when President Obama was here, Kenya is the best democracy in the whole of Eastern Africa. In fact, for I would say sub-Saharan Africa, but it's there. Sometimes we hate it and we think the democracy is too much because everybody's got a voice here. But it's an amazing democracy. Our laws are really very, very, very good. We've got freedom of speech here. And I think the economic pillar needs to be supported in a bigger way. A lot of aid has always focused on social errors, and I think Ali's going to talk about that. But the social areas is where we've been always focusing on and saying this. But hospitals, you can have private hospitals here in Kenya now. You can have education facilities, again, private sector. So a lot more empowerment to private sector development is important. The economic pillar, if we actually bring up the economic pillar which enhances job creation, and really give an incentive to number of jobs created and they get a tax incentive or whatever break, and really we can actually improve that a lot more. Doing business indicators, we've taken on a big task to say we want to get down to 50. We're right now at about 130 or something. The doing business indicators, we're going to move up the notch because a lot of things are going electronic. And I would suggest that a lot of aid from all donors, and I speak openly, we should look at e-government. We remove human discretion wherever possible. Kenya just launched e-citizen, and I can tell you one thing. I did my driving license renewal. It was done within 10 minutes online. I got it done, paid for it online, M-Pesa, and I printed it out and put it on my driving license. It's done. No going to an office, and this was done from Thika, not going to any office and saying, here, pay me money or whatever, or get it done. Nothing doing. And now all the other services are moving to this. This is something that if any aid person over here can really make sure we get it done like yesterday, we have the people, we have the technology, we have a lot more available, and we can do that. One more thing is competitiveness, and that's the last thing I'm going to stop at. Competitiveness is a pet subject of mine, and I think this is important. We need to ensure that everything we do, in any types of aid, any types of judiciary, whether it's the compliance issues, we need to have competitiveness inbuilt as a provider, which means competitiveness, which is relative competitiveness. Cost of doing business, cost of living, all that has to be far more competitive. Otherwise, we're not going to export more. And we need to export much more. Expand more jobs, really value creation, value addition. We've got COMESA. I don't know if you know that, but you probably know this. COMESA, we've got the whole market access. We've got the EPAs into Europe now. We've got AGOA that's just come in. And the whole of USA, we can export so many items to them. We're not doing enough. And I blame ourselves as private sector. We're not doing enough to really make this happen. So that's probably where we need empowerment. We need people to start looking at creative stuff. And look at the flower business in this country, the flower and horticulture. It's become one of the largest in the world. How come? It didn't have any government incentives or bonuses or tax breaks, but it's just competitiveness. And that's quite key. There they do precision farming, they do scientific farming. They actually don't worry about rain-fed. It's water management, give this right type of ingredients, and really a market, which is the Dutch market. When you look at that, competitiveness is key in everything we do. So whether it's social services, whether it's water, whether it's healthcare, whether it's education, whether it's just government services, competitiveness. We need to build that much more stronger, and really everything we do, if your common denominator for everything was, are we enhancing competitiveness of Kenya by doing this, or by East Africa? I'm saying if it could be all over, but I speak right now for Kenya. Are we enhancing competitiveness? If so, how much? The before picture and the after picture. And that would be probably a scorecard for you to measure, say, are we effective or not? Thank you, Frank. I could go on and on.
Let's give him a round of applause, yeah. Vimal, thank you very much. I think key things, local production, local value added. Chindia, you talked about, we don't just want to be a conduit for imports. And I think that's an important point. Also, I think you said efficient trade matters, helps the economy moving forward. And people are our key asset here in Kenya. So we need to look at that. Market access and value addition. And I think this important point you made about wastage is important. I think it is, and something that I think we all need to reflect on a little. But easily, and also competitiveness. And I thought it was interesting you mentioned government services, not just competitiveness in the private sector. So Vimal, I think you represented the voice very well of the private sector. We'll reach out to you in a second, but I wanted to really turn over to CS Amina Mohamed. It's great to have you here, CS. And CS is obviously Cabinet Secretary for Foreign Affairs and International Trade. So it's great to have you here. I'm going to ask you, if you could, to talk a little bit about a government's perspective on what Mark said. But I also let me say a little bit about your good self. I learnt a lot about you today, CS, that I didn't know, but you started your career back in 1985 as a legal officer in the Kenya Ministry of Local Government. I'm going to embarrass you here, working on World Bank projects and so forth. You also became then a legal advisor for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. You've had an illustrious career also working in the diplomatic service and then also with the UN, as I understand it. And obviously you spent a lot of time in Geneva and on the trade issues. So we're really honored to have you here today. Please.
Well, thank you very, very much. I have a confession to make. When I was invited to come, I wasn't told I was going to be on a panel.
Sorry.
So if I sound completely unprepared, you'll have to forgive me. But let me begin by thanking Trademark East Africa for all the support that they've continued to give us, both as a government, as a region as well, but as a ministry too, because they've been supportive of our efforts to host the World Trade Organization here in December. We've also been working on trade facilitation issues together. They're also going to support the capacity for the hosting of the World Trade Organization ministerial conference here in Nairobi. So I'm really, really grateful, to you for all that. And welcome PS Mark Lowcock. We already had a wonderful, I think, and very productive discussion at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Let me say this, welcome your message. We obviously have been, partners for a while. Very solid relationship between the UK and Kenya. Very historic and lots of shared values and everything else, language, the judicial system, So I think we're almost, tied at the hip. And so we're really, really grateful for all the support that you've continued to give us. Now let me say this, that apart from being our most important investor into the economy, also our biggest trading partner. But you've also been very supportive, and you've mentioned some of the areas: financial services, trade, education, health services, infrastructure, health, governance issues, empowerment of women, and even supporting some of the innovations that have been made in Kenya. And I think, like your children, we all wear that label. We wear it all the time. I don't know whether they do too. And I was really, really happy that you told us today that you're now moving into jobs, into economic growth, into enhancing support for the private sector. I think all that is extremely important. But let me say this, since Vimal said that some of the trade that we have experienced, the market access and all that happened without government. Vimal, we are the ones who open the markets. And we'll continue to do that, because we are really, we're really happy when you take advantage of of the market openings that that we create and we expand from time to time. And what I would just like to say is that if you're actually coming in to give us that support in those areas, you know, try and focus on the blueprint that we have and complement the efforts that government is making. Because as you yourself have said, Vimal has acknowledged, and I'm sure everybody else who will speak after me will also acknowledge, we haven't done too badly in the last 25 years that you mentioned. We've been growing, we've been building capacity, we've been becoming more efficient, we've become more effective. You know, Vimal can get his license, you know, renewed in 10 minutes, thanks to, you know, service delivery having been improved tremendously, and government having moved into the 21st century, as it were. We've also enacted legislation, and it's 21st century legislation. Our policies are equal to, if not better than many others. And so we'd really call upon you to complement the efforts that we're making. And, you know, those efforts have been tremendous, actually, tremendous. We're talking about trade facilitation, the movement of goods from Mombasa, and you're going to Mombasa. So you'll see how much work we've actually done on the ground, not on our own, with the support of Trademark and others, you know, and other partners. So look at what we've done and see in what way you can actually support us. In some cases, we don't have the necessary expertise. Sometimes it's a capacity. You know, what you did with Equity, what you did with Safaricom, what you've done with others as well. You know, we need that done more, maybe faster, right? And we will put in the requests. We are a gateway, and Vimal has mentioned that. We also hub, and we want to maintain that status. We want to improve it. I just came from South Africa a few days ago, and I don't know how many South Africans are in the room, because I don't really want to. Yeah, okay.
I think you're okay.
And there was an investment forum there. And what really, really encouraged me and pleased me more than anything else was the interest that South African investors had in coming into the Kenyan market. You know, for itself, for the Kenyan market, because they think it's a lucrative, it's an interesting market, it's a growing market, it's a promising market, but also because they wanted to access the regional market. And they knew that the best way to do it, it's not the only way, you know, because you can do it through other countries as well in our region, but the best way to do it was through Kenya. Because apart from the fact that we had the main entry point, which is the port of Mombasa, but also we had dealt with other issues that some of our neighbors have not dealt with yet, which include governance issues, which include press issues, which include, you know, issues that relate to the rule of law, democracy, and all that. And so they felt that they would be much more comfortable, including, obviously, I mean, issues such as arbitration and mediation and things like that, which would expedite the resolution of any disputes that could arise. You know, so we need the support, definitely. We, I noticed that you said along the way that, you know, you wanted us to get to a point where we will not need you as a development partner. I think we'll always need you as a development partner. We'll also need you as an investor, and we'll need you as, you know, a partner that will not just grow with us, but will create situations where we will both, you know, benefit from. And so I really don't want to say anymore. I'd like to have a much more interactive session, because there are a lot more people in the audience than on the panel. And I think all of them would like to make a contribution. They'd probably like to ask a few questions. But I just want to, again, reaffirm that we have an excellent relationship. I just came from the UK as well, along with other cabinet colleagues, and we had two very, very important events. But I also had a third one. I, for the first time, attended Prime Minister's question time, and thanks to the High Commissioner. Thank you very much for making the arrangements, and had a 1-hour meeting with my counterpart, which was also extremely, extremely productive. You know, so basically underlining the kind of relationship that the UK and Kenya have. And, you know, we don't take that for granted. It's because of people like you, Mark, who have lived in this country, who know us, who appreciate the efforts that we're making, and who want to support that effort. So you're doing everything right, but just continue supporting the efforts that we are making ourselves. and look much more closely, I think, at the blueprint that we have. Thank you.
I think, this point about the UK and Kenya being joined at the hip, I think very